How strong was Madara? It's a question that a lot of people feel as though we don't have an answer to. See, because, well, sure, Madara has been involved in tons of fights, and therefore we have about as much tape on his hypothetical power level as anybody in the Naruto universe. And that makes sense. I mean, he was supposedly the final boss of Naruto, and therefore he's involved in a ton of very important fights in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, like his fights against the Five Kage, his rematch against Hashirama, or his battles against Naruto and Sasuke. However, even though we feel as though we have a ton of tape on Madara, and therefore it should be very easy to figure out exactly how strong he was, the question still persists. How strong was Madara? Now, this obviously stems from the fact that over the duration of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, Madara only got stronger as the war progressed. He was brought back in his Edo Tensei form, was revived with no eyes, got one Rinnegan, became the Ten-Tailed Shinchuriki, got a Kamui Eye, got a second Rinnegan, and then a Rinne Sharingan. And while we have pretty scalable feats for the majority of those forms, the last form, arguably the most important form, we barely have anything. See, because the reason that the question, how powerful was Madara, persists is because his strongest form barely got any screen time. But I've never liked that excuse. And thus today, I'm gonna be analyzing every single feat that Madara has post his fight against Might Guy to once and for all answer the question, how powerful was 3 Rinnegan Madara? And before some of you click away saying, oh, there's not enough evidence for him to figure this out, yes, there is. Now, did it require me to basically retake physics classes and measure some pixels? 100%. But that's work that I had to do, not you. So let's go ahead and answer the question once and for all, because today we're talking how strong was 3 Rinnegan Madara. But before we get to diving into this physics lessons, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But before we get into all that, today we're going to talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Fume. Fume is an industry leader in the flavored air category and is quickly becoming one of the leading alternatives to smoking and vaping. It's kickstarting a whole new movement towards better habits. But how and why? Well, Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that draws flavor to your mouth. It helps fill the void that ditching a bad habit can leave, giving you something to reach for. But it's not a vape. There's no vapor, which means you can use it anywhere. And there's no nicotine, which means it's non-habit forming. All you gotta do is take one of these flavor cores, slip it into your Fume, put this wooden piece over it, and boom, you're ready to go with flavored air of tons of different flavors. Oh, that's good, maple pepper. And all of the flavors are non-toxic, so it's all guilt-free. On top of that, as Fume is powered by your breath, there's no batteries, so nothing to charge. On top of that, its metal and wood design looks awesome and gives it weight, so it's fun to fidget with. It's got magnets in it, which make it fun to slip up and down, and it's got this little salt pepper twister thing that allows you to control how much air comes in and out of it. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be the next success story they serve. Get your free topper. It's the perfect accessory for your Fume. All you have to do is slip it on the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. It's chewable for those who love to fidget, and it's reusable. So what are you guys waiting for? Go to tryfume.com/NZHammer or scan the QR code and use code NCHammer to get your free Fume topper when you order the Journey Pack today. So what do we say, folks? It's about time we start kicking those bad habits. So, a little bit earlier, you might have caught something that I said, and it might have made you scratch your head. See, I said for this video, we're going to be analyzing every single feat that Madara has post his battle against Might Guy. However, immediately post his fight against Might Guy is not when Madara gets his Rinnegan, technically. However, I believe this is a good starting point to get a baseline for how powerful Madara was leading up to his 3 Rinnegan form. I believe this because it's at this point in time that Madara starts fighting against the people who will be his final opponents, Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and well, I guess Kakashi, but not really. Kakashi is involved in the violence, but he never gets to swing back at Madara. And therefore, since the opponents for Madara don't change between his 1 Rinnegan form and his 3 Rinnegan form, I feel as though any feats that he has immediately post Might Guy against Team 7 can be used to figure out how powerful he is in his 3 Rinnegan form, at least as a baseline that we can build on top of. Now, it's important to note that heading into this battle against Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke, that Madara was heavily injured. However, that's not really all that important. See, because while Might Guy is able to kick off about half of Madara's body with his Night Guy kick, and Madara does admit to almost dying to the technique, he pretty much immediately regenerates and then proceeds to take equal, if not worse damage later on in the battle against Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura, of which he also immediately regenerates from. But what do I mean by that? Well, in the upcoming battle against Naruto and Sasuke, 1 Rinnegan Madara gets cut in half not once, but twice. See, the battle between Team 7 and one Rinnegan Madara opens with Naruto attacking Madara in Sage Mode form. Not his Sage of Six Paths Yang form that he gets from Hagoromo, just straight up Toad Sage form. Now, it's probably safe to assume that some of the Sage of Six Paths chakra was being used in this Sage form, but at the very least, Naruto is not using anything even close to KCM2. Now, because of this, the supposedly heavily injured Madara is able to block the incoming attack from Naruto rather easily with a Truth Seeker Orb Rod. However, as Naruto is using his Sage Mode and tapping into the power of the Sage of Six Paths, he's able to actually touch this True Seeker Orb, something that nobody else up until that moment has been able to do. Now, this catches Madara off guard, which gives Naruto an opportunity to create a massive lava release Rasen Shuriken that he throws at the combination of Madara and the God Tree. Now, it's important to note here that the God Tree is estimated to be somewhere between 10 and 15 miles tall, with the more accurate pixel calculations that I've seen at least saying that it's about 22 kilometers tall, or 13 and a half miles. And this is backed up by about pretty much everything we understand about when you're able to see the curvature of the Earth with the human eye, as the human eye is able to see the beginning of the curvature of the Earth at about an altitude of an airplane's cruising height, 35,000 or so feet. However, in all of the images that we get of the God Tree where we can see the entire thing, the curvature of the Earth is not subtle, but rather pronounced, implying that we're probably somewhere in the region of double that 35,000 foot height, putting us somewhere in the region of 70 or so thousand feet, aka about 13 miles. Now, this is important because in order to figure out how wide the God Tree is, and therefore how much damage Naruto is able to inflict with his lava release Rasen Shuriken, we need to have a somewhat accurate calculation of how tall the tree was so we can figure out how wide the part that Naruto cut was. Now, if we move forward with the idea that the God Tree is about 13 miles tall from its base, we can pixel calc to figure out that the base of the tree, the part that Naruto cut, is about 4.5 kilometers wide. That is to say, the diameter of the circle that Naruto cut is about 4.5 kilometers wide. Now, this is a very important calculation because this attack probably would have killed Madara, or at least put him in a situation where he was about to be finished, if the God Tree didn't whisper to him while being cut down to take it inside of him, which not only healed Madara, but also allowed for him to awaken the Rinne Sharingan in his forehead, at least eventually. However, this gives us a pretty accurate look into what the defensive capability of a one Rinnegan Madara was, which is that an attack that has the ability to cut down a 5-kilometer wide tree, aka an attack that's able to wipe out an area of roughly 16 kilometers squared, would be able to inflict enough damage upon Madara to take him out of a fight. Now, it didn't eviscerate Madara. In fact, it didn't even cut him in half. It just left him with deep gashes. But being fatally wounded by an attack gives us a really, really good idea of exactly where his defensive abilities cap out. Now, an area of 16 kilometers squared is massive. Manhattan, the main island of New York City, is only 60 kilometers squared. And thus, if this attack were to hit Manhattan, it would destroy a fourth of the island, essentially being able to destroy the entirety of Central Park and the surrounding metropolitan areas. And thus, with that calc, we can see that Madara, in his one Rinnegan form, very easily has city-level durability. But this is not the end of Madara's forms, as after absorbing the God Tree and getting back up from the lava release Rasen Shuriken, Madara finds himself toe-to-toe with the likes of his final opponents, Sage of Six Paths Naruto and 6 Tomei Rinnegan Sasuke. Now, this fight opens up with Madara trying to hit Naruto with a Gale-style mouth laser, an attack that is fired at the speed of light that Naruto is able to dodge at point-blank ranges. However, immediately after dodging this Gale-style mouth laser, Madara slaps Naruto out of the sky. And as it was just very clearly established that Naruto was able to dodge light-speed attacks at point-blank ranges, the fact that Madara was able to follow up this light-speed attack with an attack that did hit Naruto out of the sky implies that he also was able to move at a massively faster than light speed. And mind you, at this point, he hasn't even awoken his second Rinnegan. Now, it's at this point in the fight that Naruto and Sasuke are trying to crack the code of Madara's one Limbo clone. And when Naruto tries to use Magna Release Rasengan or Truth Seeker Orbs to try and pin down this Limbo clone, Sasuke actually pierces through Madara's chest with his katana, which forces Madara to pull his Limbo clone back into him. And the fact that Sasuke was able to land this hit against Madara also means that he is FTL plus very easily in this fight. Sasuke and Naruto then continue this barrage as Naruto hits Madara with a Magna Release Rasengan, and Sasuke hits Madara with an Amaterasu Chidori, both of which he's able to tank rather easily. And it's at this point that Naruto is able to sense where Madara's Limbo clone is and hit it with a Magnet Release Rasengan, locking it in place. However, unfortunately, this does give Madara a chance to get away from the battle against Naruto and Sasuke and fly over to Kakashi, whose Kamui Eye he yoinks out. Madara then pops the Kamui Eye into his empty eye hole socket and begins to fly away from the likes of Sasuke, who at this point he was kind of 1v1ing. But Sasuke's actually able to catch up with him, even though Madara has a lead at this point, and apply Chidori to his katana and cut Madara in half. However, Madara survives being cut in half and just uses Kamui on his upper half, which speaks to, at this moment in time, Madara's ridiculous regeneration factor. I mean, just a couple of chapters previously, it had been established that when Madara had been kicked by Night Guy, he almost died. However, when Sasuke cuts off his legs, he just floats around as a torso and comes back from the Kamui dimension with legs again. Now, it could be argued that the reason that Madara was able to regenerate his legs is because he gets a power-up in the Kamui dimension. That is to say that he's able to throw Sakura out of the Kamui dimension and grab the Rinnegan out of Obito's face, but the Rinnegan has never explicitly been stated to have a regenerative ability, especially if you have two of them. So it's probably safe to assume here that Madara just had this regeneration ability before he even flew into the Kamui dimension, which means even though technically Sasuke actually hit Madara with a stronger attack than the one that Naruto hit him with, as Naruto's Lava Release Rasen Shuriken did not cut Madara in half, but Sasuke's Chidori applied katana did, the absorption of the entirety of the God Tree after Naruto cut it down gave Madara an exponential power boost. However, unfortunately, you can't really calc how much energy Sasuke swung into Madara with his Chidori katana. But like I said before, the fact that Sasuke was able to inflict damage to Madara that Naruto technically wasn't able to do implies that this time Sasuke is also attacking with easily city-level attacks. And mind you, this is without his Susanoo. That is just a base form Sasuke using Chidori. But enough about Sasuke. We're talking about Madara here. But it is important to understand how powerful Naruto and Sasuke are because they are the two people that he fights against. Anyways, Madara. When Madara returns back from the Kamui dimension with two Rinnegan, this is where it begins to get revealed that he is absurdly powerful. Like, more powerful than a lot of Naruto readers realize. See, because when Madara returns to the battlefield with two Rinnegan, he now has an additional opponent. And that additional opponent is Sakura, using her strength of 100 seal. And thus, when the battle kicks off between two Rinnegan Madara and Team 7 minus Kakashi, Sakura is actually the first person to rush in after activating her strength of 100 seal. However, she runs and jumps towards Madara, presumably to smash him into the ground with her berserker strength. Madara very easily intercepts her attack by stabbing her through the stomach. Now, Sakura anticipated this, as she has a regeneration ability through her strength of 100 seal that allows for her to die over 100 times. So a stab wound through the stomach isn't really anything all that major. And thus, even though Sakura has been stabbed through her stomach, she goes to wind up a punch that would undoubtedly at least kind of injure Madara. However, before she's able to land that punch, both Naruto and Sasuke fly in, with Naruto grabbing Sakura and landing a kick into Madara's face, and Sasuke flying in with a Chidori that he also hits Madara in the face with. Now, it's important to remember here that we literally just calced Sasuke's Chidori to be a city-level attack. A city-level attack that prior to getting a second Rinnegan was able to cut Madara in half. However, in this moment where Madara is simultaneously hit by KCM2 Sage of Six Paths Yang Mode Naruto and a Sage of Six Paths 6 Tome Sasuke's Chidori, he doesn't even flinch. He stands there thinking about, oh wow, this is the second time I've seen somebody use Hashirama's regenerative ability today, all the while being hit with two very easily city level attacks that do not even phase him. And this right here is why it's so difficult to talk about Madara's final form in terms of power, because this is his second substantial power up in as many chapters. Based off the reaction of Madara being hit by the taijutsu of Naruto and the ninjutsu of Sasuke in base form, it's safe to assume that any amount of these attacks probably would have amounted to next to nothing in a prolonged battle against him. And thus, the feasible conclusion to come here is that Madara's durability with a second Rinnegan bumps to somewhere around island level, maybe higher. Now, there's technically no way to calc that yet, but there will be soon. But it is important to note here that technically at this moment in time, the shared AP of Naruto and Sasuke is moon level, as through the usage of Six Paths Chibaku Tensei, both Naruto and Sasuke are able to create a new moon around Kaguya in these exact same forms. Now, there's an argument to be made here that, oh, that's just a specific Fuinjutsu that allows them to collect a bunch of debris. But it is still a Fuinjutsu that they're able to use on account of the energy and power that they have. Now, I'm not going to say at this moment in time Madara was just hit with a moon level attack, but that is an important thing to keep in the back of our minds here. A similarly important thing to keep in the back of our minds here is that Madara 2 Rinnegan is able to use 4 Limbo clones. Though we never really see these 4 Limbo clones do anything all that important, because pretty much the first thing that we see Madara do after getting his second Rinnegan is his second Chibaku Tensei. You know that jutsu we just talked about that Naruto and Sasuke use together to kill Kaguya? See, Madara does it by himself, and this is really the only truly scalable feat we have with 2 Rinnegan Madara, outside of maybe Infinite Tsukiyomi, but we'll get into that later. However, this feat is highly scalable, though It takes a lot of math. See, previously when we've seen people use Chibaku Tensei, we've seen them create 1, maybe 2 meteors. And with those 1 or 2 meteors have an absolutely devastating effect to the surroundings, as those meteors were usually able to pull in entire mountains or forests to their gravity well center that could be thrown at enemies. And the majority of these Chibaku Tenseis that we saw came from either Nagato or his Deva path. However, immediately after 2 Rinnegan Madara begins to use Chibaku Tensei, Naruto looks up in the sky and says, there's a lot more of them than Nagato could use, and they're a whole lot bigger. And he's not lying. Now, the Chibaku Tensei that Naruto are most likely referring to in this moment are either the Chibaku Tensei that Edo Nagato used against him, Killer Bee, and Itachi, or the Chibaku Tensei that the Deva Path was able to capture Naruto into during their battle in Konoha. However, in the lead up to Naruto actually being captured in one of these Chibaku Tensei, the Deva Path also used Chibaku Tensei, I believe, 2 times in the lead up to the big one that Naruto had to break out of with his 8 Tails form of Kurama. And by analyzing all the times that Nagato or the Deva Path used Chibaku Tensei, we can see that Nagato, every time he used Chibaku Tensei, was at least ripping up entire forests and at most ripping up entire mountains to create the gravity well meteors that he was hucking at opponents. And thus the baseline for Madara's Chibaku Tensei being that they're bigger than Nagato's, who had the ability to pull up entire mountains into the meteors that he threw at his enemies, implies that these meteors that Madara were creating are truly huge. And they are. Problematically huge. See, because in the panel where we see Madara, rather effortlessly mind you, use Chibaku Tensei, when we see him create the roughly 23 meteors that he does end up creating, there's some additional debris, and if you counted the additional debris, it would be around 26 meteors, but it's really 23. We can very, and I mean very easily see the curvature of the Earth. The mountainous landscape of Naruto's planet looks as though it's just covered in small dimples, and oceans look like puddles. It is very, and I mean very clear that we are very far away from Madara, Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura when we see these meteors created. However, as in the scene, we're still able to see the root of the God Tree and the battlefield crater around the God Tree. We're able to pixel calc exactly how big each and every single one of these 23 meteors is. There's also the scenes in the anime where we see Naruto use Rasen Shuriken or Sasuke use his Susanoo to slice up these meteors. And this is actually the way that I went about calculating this scene. However, because I was using the anime and a lot of the scenes in the anime are added to fill in spaces between manga panels, I found my calcs were slightly inaccurate, or at least inconsistent. See, initially I measured the diameter of Naruto's Rasen Shuriken compared to how tall I know Naruto is, which is 5'6" in part 2. Yes, Naruto is 5'6" in part 2. And they say short people can't get things done. I then, using Naruto's height, figured out that the diameter of the Rasen Shuriken was roughly about 6 feet across. And then in the anime, there is a scene where Naruto throws this Rasen Shuriken at one of the meteors descending towards him, and we get a pretty good shot of both the Rasen Shuriken and the meteor. However, it appears as though the anime seemed to make the Rasen Shuriken too big, because using said Rasen Shuriken for scale, it told me that the length of the meteor that I was measuring was about 84 feet long, which is absolutely not something we would have been able to see from the distance that we see in the manga. And therefore I went about calculating the size of these meteors in a different way, which was using the wingspan of Sasuke's Susanoo. See, because in the anime we also see Sasuke use his perfect Susanoo and fly up to these meteors to slice them with his gigantic katanas. And as we do roughly know how big 6-Tomei Rinnegan Sasuke's Susanoo is, which is roughly the size of Madara's perfect Susanoo, mind you. Yes, Sasuke's Susanoo is smaller than Madara's for the majority of the 4th Great Shinobi World War, but when he awakens to a 6-Tomei Rinnegan, his Susanoo gets substantially bigger, clocking in at about 320 meters tall, with a wingspan that's about 2.5 times wider than his Susanoo is tall, giving Sasuke an end of the war arc wingspan with a Susanoo at about 750 meters long. And therefore, using Sasuke's Susanoo wingspan, I was able to figure out that his wingspan was about 1/6 as wide as the meteor that he cut, telling me that the meteor that he was cutting was actually just about 4.5 kilometers wide. And if 4.5 kilometers sounds familiar to any of you, that would mean that the meteors are just about as wide as the base of the God Tree that Naruto cut using his lava release Rasen Shuriken, making each and every single one of these meteors wider than Manhattan at its widest, as Manhattan at its widest is actually only about 3.7 kilometers across. Now this calc actually ends up being a lower end calc, as somebody smarter than me undoubtedly at Cable's calculations used the battlefield blast radius crater, whose diameter had been previously previously calculated to pixel calculate how big each and every single one of these meteors was. But there is a pretty big and pretty important discrepancy between their calculations and mine. Well, there's actually a couple of important discrepancies. One, there's the fact that I used the anime and they used the manga, which is probably the more accurate source. And two, the fact that they found that the diameter of the average meteor was roughly 15 kilometers wide. Now, while I understand that each and every single one of you doesn't want to be hit with a 4.5 kilometer wide meteor as much as you don't want to be hit with a 15 kilometer wide meteor, the difference between those two meteors is exponential. See, the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, you know, the one that made the Gulf of Mexico, was estimated to be somewhere between 10 and 15 kilometers in diameter. And that meteor hit the Earth with so much energy that it created a global tsunami, 30 times more powerful than any tsunami we've ever seen in the human era, that plunged the entire world into an ice age that inevitably killed all of the dinosaurs, only allowing for tiny little mammals like mice, well, at least the ancestors of mice, to survive. Yes, some other amphibians and other things like that also survived, but it killed a lot of things, most things. Now, while I did say that the meteor that killed the dinosaurs was estimated to be between 10 and 15 kilometers wide in diameter, most scientists believe that it was on the lower end of that range, in the 10 kilometer range. And thus, we begin to run into our problems here. See, because Caleb's calculations state that the smallest of these 23 meteors is 7 kilometers wide, with the widest being about 18.5 kilometers wide, and the average floating somewhere comfortably in that 15 kilometer wide range. Now, the Chicxulub Collider, aka the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, hit the Earth with the power of 100 teratons of TNT, aka the power of 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. Quick caveat here, a teraton is 1 trillion tons. Now, if we assume that my anime-based calculations are correct here, but honestly I tend to lean more towards the manga calculations, and each of these meteors has roughly a 4.5 kilometer wide diameter, that means that each of these meteors would strike the Earth with roughly 1/3 of the power of the Chicxulub Collider, meaning that each meteor would strike with roughly the power of 33 teratons of TNT. Now, the Chicxulub Collider, when it hit Earth, mind you, in water, and that is important, created a blast crater with a diameter of 180 kilometers. Now, if it had landed somewhere solid as opposed to the ocean, that blast crater probably would have been bigger, but that's the number that we have to work with now. So if we're assuming that my anime-based calculations are correct, each and every single one of these meteors, when they hit Earth, would leave a blast crater of roughly 60 kilometers wide. And thus, the total combined destructive force in terms of blast crater, if you were to line them all up, let's say hypothetically, would be a 60 kilometer wide line that would run for a total of 1,350 kilometers. But if for some reason that's not giving you the mental image you need, the area of a circle with a diameter of 60 is 2,827. That is, say, 2,827 kilometers squared. Times that by 23 and you get 65,000 squared kilometers. Island nation of Sri Lanka, or the country of Lithuania. So the lowball, my calc for this attack is small country level, or big island level. However, if you use the manga calculation, which I inherently trust more, the diameter of those meteors goes up from 4.5 kilometers wide to roughly 15, meaning that energetically every single one of those 23 meteors carries the same destructive force of the Chicxulub Collider, meaning that every single one of those meteors could collide with the Earth at roughly a force of 100 teratons, assuming that they'd be traveling at the same speed of the Chicxulub Collider, which we can calc. I tried, it's awful. Now, one would assume that if the meteor is 3 times as big, all I need to do is 3 times the amount of destructive force, right? Wrong. Incredibly wrong. See, because if a blast crater has the diameter of 60 kilometers, the area of that circle is around 2,800 kilometers square. However, the area of a circle with a diameter of 180 kilometers is 25,500 kilometers squared, almost 10x. And thus, if hypothetically 23 of those meteors were to hurtle towards Earth, they would be able to wipe off the map roughly 600,000 kilometers squared of area, aka roughly France. 60,000 or so square kilometers of France would be fine, which some people would argue is too much. But the through line for both of these calcs is that Madara is throwing, with his dual Rinnegan form, a country-level attack at Naruto and Sasuke, something that they're able to rather easily repel, mind you. As Sasuke flies up to the meteors with his perfect Susanoo and starts slicing them into tinier bits, and Naruto throws a couple, presumably 20-ish, tailed beast Rasen shurikens up into the sky and destroys the rest of them, very easily establishing that both Naruto and Sasuke in this current current moment at the peak of their powers are country level. I mean, yes, Sasuke's not using Indra's arrow, and Naruto has combined 3 Kuramas into 1 Kurama to make 3-faced 27-tailed Kurama, but they are still using what's pretty close to the top of their power to wipe out country level attacks. Now, after all these Chibaku Tensei get destroyed by Naruto or Sasuke, the next thing that Madara does is rip off his kind of horn and reflect his Rinnegan Sharingan off the moon to pull off an infinite Tsukiyomi. Now, while this itself is very impressive and technically casts the entire world under a Genjutsu under Madara's control, I wouldn't say this is a planet level attack. It's a Genjutsu, it doesn't have a physical presence. Like, yes, he's able to affect the entire world with this technique because he's technically able to make the moon basically into his Rinnegan Sharingan, but that's like just kind of how infinite Tsukiyomi and the Rinnegan Sharingan work. And thus it would be kind of a stretch to me to be like, oh, this is a moon or planet level attack. And the same kind of goes for his divine deep forest emergence. See, because immediately after reflecting his Rinnegan Sharingan off the moon and casting the entire world into infinite Tsukiyomi, Madara uses divine deep forest emergence, a technique that technically, at least if we're to believe what we're shown, has him grow the roots of the god tree throughout the entirety of Earth, catching every single human in a little wrapping that sucks their energy back to the god tree. Now, hypothetically, if you were to say that this is 100% on Madara, this is the most impressive thing he's ever done. Deathmatch, where they did their Madara versus Aizen calculation to see who was more powerful, basically treated Madara growing roots throughout the entirety of the Earth as a planet level attack, as the amount of force required to grow roots through the entirety of the Earth to catch every single human is immense. However, once again, kind of like with Infinite Tsukiyomi, that to me feels disingenuous because it inherently ignores the god tree aspect of all of this. See, the god tree, as we now know from Boruto, is kind of inherently built to grow its roots into the earth and suck out all of its energy, people included. And this backed up by the fact that we've seen people like Momoshiki, who has no access to wood release, use the god tree multiple times to absorb all of the energy from a planet. So while I do think Madara growing the tree roots through all of Earth to catch every single human is ridiculous if you want to calc his power, and I can't necessarily fault anybody who wants to do that, I'm not going to. So where does that leave us with 2 Rinnegan Madara? Well, Madara doesn't necessarily have any speed feats in his 2 Rinnegan form. He is able to react very easily to the attack of Sakura, though she does kind of just run straight at him. And 1 Rinnegan Madara was able to slap Naruto out of the sky, who could dodge point-blank light speed attacks. So 2 Rinnegan Madara is very easily FTL to FTL+. On top of this, as he eats an attack from both Naruto and Sasuke without flinching, and both of them display that they are very easily country-level AP fighters by destroying his Chibaku Tensei, and taking into consideration that his defensive level should be comparable to that of his AP, Madara's defensive level is also somewhere most likely in the region of country level. Which brings us to our last and probably most important category, AP, attack potency. If we are assuming that every single one of Madara's meteors, all 23 of them, were going to collide with the Earth with the equal force of the Chicxulub Collider, and thus each and every single one of them would generate 100 teratons of TNT of force, that would mean that the attack that Madara launched at Naruto and Sasuke was about to generate roughly 2.3 quadrillion tons of TNT of force, aka about 230 billion Hiroshima bombs. Now, while that does sound like a ridiculous amount of force, because it doesn't make Madara planet level, or even moon level, as the estimated force required to destroy the moon is roughly 29 quintillion tons of TNT. And 2.3 quadrillion goes into 29 quintillion about 10,000 times, meaning that Madara is only 1/10 of his way to being moon level, at least based off what we saw. Mind you, the Chibaku Tensei that he used seemed somewhat effortless. But with all of that taken into consideration, Madara's AP is somewhere between mid to large country size, being able to very easily wipe off the map countries like France, meaning that Madara's Chibaku Tensei could wipe out any country in Europe outside of Russia. And thus, once and for all, the question of how strong was 3 Rinnegan Madara comes to a close, with the answer being a resounding roughly as strong as either Naruto or Sasuke in their final forms at the end of Shippuden, but definitely not strong enough to win in a battle against both of them simultaneously, and definitely not as strong as Kaguya. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Do you think my calculations are accurate? Do you think Madara was stronger than Kaguya? And do you think he could have beat Naruto and Sasuke in a fight? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I never want to think about physics ever again.